But yeah, there are a lot of other like real estate companies out there that, like you said, they proclaim to have this formula to sell your house, and but a lot of agents, and myself included, we kind of have a formula as well, and we've been doing what they do for years. So anybody can sell a house. They can sell a house quick. They can sell it for over asking price. You list a house under the market value, it's going to go quick and it's going to go for over asking. So that's a no-brainer. So, but being able to get, like I said, the most money, get the best situation for the client is really what matters.
Welcome to the Uncensored Real Estate Podcast, where nothing is off limits. If you're interested in buying, selling, or investing in real estate, and you want to learn some of the insider secrets and uncensored truths from the true professionals in and around real estate, you've come to the right place. Now, let's buckle up for the uncensored truth about real estate and join your host, Brian Cardenas.
All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Uncensored Real Estate Podcast, where nothing is off limits and we try to share information with you, the public, that you probably don't know otherwise. And so, as always, we try to bring on people who have a clue about what they're doing in the real estate industry. And so today we decided to bring on Rachele Oram. She has been doing this for how long now?
7 years.
7 years. And so she does a good number of transactions every year. And so that's the kind of person we want to talk to, is someone that has the experience to be able to share some things with people. So I wanted to say welcome to you, Rachele.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
That's nobody's nervous today, so don't worry about the nervousness. We're just going to have a quick conversation about what's going on. And so I always like to start out by asking our guests, what is something that you feel like the public really doesn't know about the real estate industry that they probably should know?
I guess, everybody knows it's a seller's market. We hear it's a seller's market. But there are lots of options out there, and there's options for everybody. Maybe just knowing that, finding the right niche, finding the right option for each individual person, and just trying to educate sellers and buyers right now. There's a lot of noise from all different directions, and just trying to figure out what's best for each individual client is really the key.
So, like, from a seller's perspective, because you do a lot of listings, what is something that you could tell sellers to ask prospective agents about when they're going to list their property? Because it's hard for consumers to know what's right, what's wrong, and what's the best way for them to go. So what's some advice you give a seller in terms of figuring out the right agent for them?
Well, it just depends on what they need. So sometimes it's about the money, but it's not always about the money. Sometimes they need to buy a house, so they need to be able to possibly stay in their house for a little bit longer in order to buy something, or maybe they're contingent. So, and they're just trying to figure out this buying, selling without becoming homeless. I think that's probably one of the seller's biggest fears right now. It is a seller's market. Selling a house is kind of a no-brainer to a point, but you can sell a house. Anybody can sell a house right now, but our job as agents is to get you the most money and to make it as easy as possible. And sometimes that might be with, an iBuyer. There's agents out there that want the business, but then, trying to find an agent that just really can sit down, listen to what the seller needs, and then just try to help the seller the best that they can to meet those needs.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. You hear real estate companies out there advertising all the time, that they can sell your house fast. They've got some special thing. They got a new way of doing things. And there's really not that much new that's actually happening, other than, like you mentioned, the iBuyer phenomenon. And I think sometimes people don't realize, it's convenient to do the whole iBuyer thing.
Yeah.
It's really convenient. It's great. But it's also really, really expensive, isn't it?
It is. And I've had clients that we've sat down and we've looked at the numbers, and we've ran different scenarios, and I've even suggested that they go with an iBuyer. So for them, maybe it's the easiest thing. I kind of equate an iBuyer to, and this is a really simple, like simplified analogy, but think of it as like a pawn shop. Like you're going to go in and you're going to give them your goods and you're going to walk away and you're going to be done. You're going to wash your hands of it. You're not going to have any stress. It's not a bad thing. Obviously, pawn shops do really well because for some people, just being able to walk away is the easiest solution for them. Our job, my job as an agent is just to try to get them the most money that they can for their house or to make the process as seamless as possible. So sometimes that might be with like I said, an iBuyer. But yeah, there are a lot of other like real estate companies out there that, like you said, they proclaim to have this formula to sell your house. And but a lot of agents, and myself included, we kind of have a formula as well. And we've been doing what they do for years. So anybody can sell a house. They can sell a house quick. They can sell it for over asking price. You list a house under the market value, it's going to go quick and it's going to go for over asking. So that's a no-brainer. So, but being able to get, like I said, the most money, get the best situation for the client is really what matters. So,
and that's the thing I think a lot of times that people as consumers need to hear is that there's not one place that can solve one problem, whether it's an iBuyer solving the convenience problem or a company that says, oh, I can sell your house in X number of days and you can stay there forever. Like you can go to real estate agent A, B, C, or D, and for the most part, they're all going to be able to do those same things. So then really what it comes down to is figuring out who's going to really represent your interests the best, because not that these other companies aren't trying to represent your interests, but your specific goals have to be taken into consideration. And sometimes they don't fit like in the little box that these other companies have created and done a great job at marketing. But you've got to make sure that it individually fits for you as a consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had clients that we've gotten their house sold, we've been able to lease it back. Well, they found a new home. So those are all things, like you said, that can be negotiated. And it's just all part of the process, and just finding an agent who legitimately can listen to what the seller's or buyer concerns are and just try to make sure that they're meeting or exceeding kind of those expectations and taking away some of those pain points, because it's scary sometimes. It's not that people don't want to sell their house. Everybody talks about the shortage of houses on the market. I think that there's actually a lot of people that really want to sell their house, but they're worried where they're going to go. Right. So it's not that they just have those concerns, and then just being able to educate sellers and kind of talk through, yeah, it's a seller's market. Let's work with that to try to make it to give you some time to find something. Maybe you stay in your house a little bit longer. Maybe we find something and we write a contingent offer. I've had agents tell me you can't get contingent offers accepted in this market. I've had really good success getting contingent offers accepted in this market because the seller on the other side knows that it's a no-brainer. They're going to sell their house in a week anyway. Yeah. So it's not as scary for the seller on the other side to accept that contingent offer. They know that the buyer's house is going to sell. Yeah, and that's I think where like we come in when we're having a conversation with a client. That's the big fear is, I want to sell, I want to buy, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to find anything. So how can I list my house? And then we try to jump through all these hoops on the financing side of it. Like, can we make it so that you're not contingent on the sale of your property? Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And even when it doesn't, like I always try to tell people, that doesn't mean you're not going to be able to get an offer accepted. Because like you said, we see it all the time. Like obviously all of our clients have financing. They're not all cash buyers or not contingent. And we're still getting contracts accepted. People are still being able to do this. And like we're getting them, just like you said, where they haven't even listed their house yet. Yeah. But it's about you educating them and making them understand that, yeah, it's not impossible to get a contingent offer accepted, because sellers realize, like, as soon as you put it on the market, it's going to be gone in a few days.
There's not really a problem there.
Yeah.
And then that comes into play also in terms, like you were talking about, negotiating to be able to give yourself some extra time. So that's one of the things we hear in advertisements all the time. Hey, stay up to 6 months. Can every seller stay up to 6 months if they negotiate that, or if they want to negotiate that in their contract?
I mean, it's possible. If the buyer wants the house enough, they're gonna. And I've even had situations where I'm representing the seller, and the buyer has had to find an Airbnb just to make the transaction work. They wanted the house enough that they're willing to do that. So that's possible. But yeah, anything's possible. Anything can be negotiated.
And that's true. I mean, it's all negotiable. I think one of the things, like when I see those advertisements, it makes the consumer think that, like, every time without fail, you can stay up to 6 months in your house. And here's little breaking news here. You can't always stay 6 months in your house, because what that requires is a buyer, number one, who's going to allow for it, which of course a lot of buyers might say that's okay. If that buyer is living in the house as their primary residence and they're getting a loan, you can't stay in that house more than 60 days as a seller.
Yeah.
So that's something that people find out afterward. It sounds like, oh, I'm going to be able to stay 6 months. It's no problem.
Yeah.
Well, you got a choice to make. You're either not going to accept an offer from a buyer who's getting a loan and going to live in their primary residence, and that wipes out a whole segment of buyers out there, or you're not going to stay 6 months, or you're just selling it to an investor. So like those are like the little fine print details that people don't find out about up front when they hear advertisements, but that they need to know that's the reality of things. Is there on the buyer's side of things, when you're representing a buyer, is there something that you've like been able to figure out to do in terms of the offer structure, how it's presented, or anything like that that helps you get your buyer's offers accepted?
Man, just calling and talking to the listing agent, finding out what the seller needs. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's not just money. Sometimes they absolutely love their house and their neighborhood, and they want it to go to someone who's going to love their house and their neighborhood just like they do. This is an emotional decision on both sides. So finding out what those pain points are for the seller and talking to the listing agent, and then make sure that we're structuring that offer to the best we can to kind of meet those needs. And so it just takes a lot of communication, and just trying to find out what's most important, because it's not always about the money.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like in this market today, it's all about the seller. Like it doesn't really matter on the buyer side of things what you really want. And that's where what you're saying is so important. Like if you don't ask as an agent to that listing agent what's important to the seller, you're not going to know. You're guessing. You're just going to throw a number on an offer, or write in all these clauses, or waive these contingencies, or do whatever things that you feel like you might need to do, but you don't really know. Like you're just guessing. And I think that's something that gets missed sometimes. I mean, do you get offers on the listing side of it where you haven't even heard from the buyer's agent?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It happens all the time. And it's sad, because I think these poor buyers, it's a disservice to them. They possibly could have come in with a really strong offer, and maybe there was little things, but when you've got these offers sitting in front of you, and I'm seeing this more and more, and it's hard to educate buyers because they feel like a transaction should be kind of a little bit more back and forth, but you kind of have to come in with your best offer. And so because or sellers are a little bit overwhelmed, they've got all of these offers sitting in front of them, and it's hard to go back to each and every one of them. Now, as a listing agent, I try to, as much as I can, get that conversation going with all of the different offers out there. But there's agents out there that, or whatever, that just, they get the offers. It is what it is. There's no back and forth. There's no countering. There's no communication of what the other offers are. It's whatever comes in. They lay them in front of them and they pick an offer. That's one way to do it. But I don't know that's one way to do it.
Well, I mean, I hear some agents, listing agents, I mean, they'll take all the offers, they'll put them on a spreadsheet.
Exactly.
And then put them in front of the client. And so like if you've made mistakes, one of the things I hear sometimes is, you get incomplete or shoddy offers, like things aren't filled out correctly, or all kinds of stuff written into the contract. I mean, and from the listing agent side of it, I'm sure when you look at that, it gives kind of a negative first impression, right?
Yeah.
And then if you're getting a lot of offers, you don't always have the time to go back, like you said, and like allow them the chance to fix it
Yeah.
or find out why did you write these things in there. So like when a buyer is looking for their representation, like what kind of questions would be good to ask their agent to see if this is an agent that does operate in the way you're talking about, like having that communication, talking to listing agent, like what can they do as a consumer to find the right person?
Well, I think it's just the interviewing, and not every agent that they interview is going to be a good fit. But it's good to just have that conversation and just make sure that the agent's listening to what their needs are. So just trying to meet their needs, that's what's important.
What are some of the most appealing things in a buyer's offer that they can make right now that appeals to a seller? Other than price. Price is obvious. Like,
price.
Yeah, if you bid $100,000 over everybody else, you got a good chance. But
yeah,
like you said, that doesn't always do it, because that may not work. Like, especially if they've got a financed offer and they're going that high over.
Yeah,
you need an appraisal still.
Yeah. So, I mean, you come in with your highest, and I tell buyers, you got to come in strong, especially if they're not planning on countering, especially if the sellers are not planning on countering and they're just going to take the offers as is. And that communication to find out what the process is going to be. Sometimes they're going to review all offers on Monday or whatever, and just finding out what the process is going to look like. And so sometimes we'll structure the offer different just depending on what that process looks like. But yeah, you come in strong. If you can, waive the appraisal. If you can, waive the repairs. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean waiving the inspection. You still would do an inspection. But there is a lot of risk. And so I have to sit down with my buyers and say, listen, if we're going to do this, this is what this means. Like you're kind of putting it all on the line, and it's a little bit of a scary situation, but we kind of talk about the pros and cons and the different scenarios that we can work to make that offer look as appealing as possible, but not put the buyer at risk too.
Yeah, those are, I mean, the contingency waivers are tough, and I think it's important, like, for buyers to understand that, because I hear this a lot. Well, we're waiving the appraisal. And then, we got to go get an appraisal for their loan. Like, wait a minute, we waived the appraisal. Well, you didn't actually waive the appraisal.
Yeah.
You waived the contingency where you can get out of the contract if the appraisal comes in low. Mm-hmm. And that's, it's pretty commonplace. I mean, I would guess it's probably happening over 3/4 of the time now where people are having to waive the appraisal, or at least say, I'll pay X amount of dollars above an appraisal if it does come in low. And with that, you mentioned about the inspection waiver. So let's say you don't really waive the inspection, because I don't see a lot of people like completely waiving the inspection, although there are some out there doing it.
Yep.
Like, even if it's a really short inspection window, let's say you find something wrong, like, can you go back and still ask for repairs then?
No, and you can say you're going to waive the repairs, but you're waiving those repairs, and we have those discussions. There's a lot of there's a lot of education that goes into it with the buyers to just understand, listen, if we say no repairs and we ask for repairs, they're in jeopardy of losing their earnest deposit. So it's either kind of take it or leave it at that point. And they can still cancel if there's something major that's wrong that they find in the inspection. But asking for repairs on that BINS or that buyer inspection seller response, when you've already waived those repairs, that puts them in jeopardy of losing that earnest deposit.
Even if that's during their inspection period, they have a chance of losing it too?
Well, they if they waive the repairs, they either take it or leave it. You really can't ask for repairs once you said that you're going to waive repairs.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You got to always be educated on what those pitfalls are of doing these things. Because like one thing that I hear happening a lot outside of our market is waiving their financing contingency. And, that here in Arizona, that is basically, it lasts throughout the length of the contract in the standard language. So basically, if you get turned down for your loan, a day before closing, you could get your earnest deposit back. When you waive that, then you can't get out for that. If you waived your appraisal contingency, you can't get out for that. So that means you're pretty committed. So that's a pretty aggressive and strong offer from the buyer standpoint. If someone was going to consider that, like, what's the important piece of what they need to do in the beginning so that they can minimize the amount of risk, like with their financing, for example?
I mean, just like with you, just making sure that they're fully pre-qualified and that somebody hasn't just kind of glanced over their income and their...
You mean that happens? Like just kind of briefly looking at it and throwing out a pre-qualification?
Yeah, I mean, it happens, right? I don't know.
It does.
Yeah, it does. So yeah, absolutely making sure that they are fully pre-qualified, that there's not going to be any hiccups, having somebody like really look at all of those pieces of information that are going to play into the financing, and making sure that they, like you said, they don't, because if they do waive the or make the earnest money hard, or waive that financing contingency, which I've seen that, I've even used it just to be able to get that offer accepted, and we've talked about it and we've had those discussions before, and made sure that the buyers know exactly what that means. But yeah, it's just super important to make sure that like they've been fully pre-qualified, that they're not going to get to the end and not get
They don't like surprises at the end.
Nobody likes surprises at the end. So there's a reason why, like as agents, we have certain lenders that we like to use. It's just because we trust them.
Right.
Like we know that they're going to get to the end. Unless something crazy comes up, and it's partially educating buyers, don't go out and buy anything, large purchases right before closing.
Don't change your jobs. Don't go buy a new car before you close. Like, yeah.
Don't buy a new car.
I mean, it's so important. And sometimes it happens, like we'll send things to people, we'll tell them that, and they still do that stuff. But obviously we're trying to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah.
But I think it's important also for people to realize that there's a difference in how far or what kind of pre-qualification or pre-approval you have. And it's hard for the consumer because those terms are used kind of interchangeably. A pre-qualification, the way that it's kind of defined is where it is just that kind of cursory look at stuff and, okay, yeah, you look good. And here in Arizona, we have a pre-qualification form that we complete saying, yeah, we've reviewed these documents, or we mark off what documents we've reviewed. But then there's another step to it, and that is a pre-approval or a credit underwriting approval. And that's where, because the surprise, the loan officer like me, I don't get to decide who gets a loan, because I'd probably want everybody to get a loan. Yeah. But it goes through to the underwriter, who's the one that's making the decision. And when you get to that stage, all of that like background investigation and employment verifications, checking all the other stuff, looking for other properties, because you can't hide anything from lenders anymore. It used to happen way back when. Like, we're going to find out, so you might as well just tell us up front. But that's another step to it. Like, if we can have somebody fully credit underwritten and approved, and we can go to the listing agent with that and say, hey, this person is almost as good as a cash buyer. Really, the only thing we've got to get is an appraisal. And then, of course, if you've waived the appraisal contingency and we've shown that they've got enough money to be able to bridge that gap, well, now you've elevated yourself up to being able to compete with a cash offer. And like you said, the highest price doesn't always win, because like somebody can come in and blow everybody out of the water. And if they don't end up closing, that didn't do the seller any good.
No.
So like, how do you, from the listing agent then, you're representing the seller, like what are the hot button things that you're looking for in those offers to make you feel confident about it going through? Because I hear all the time where people just throw out a bunch of cash offers, they haven't seen the property, and then they might get under contract on 2 or 3 of them. and then decide which one they want to go with. And you've got to try to like filter that out when you're presenting these offers to a seller. So like, what's the best way to do that as a listing agent?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So yeah.
I ask hard questions.
You do.
I'm not going to throw you just softballs.
Okay. So yeah, I try to call the lender, and a lot depends on, like you said, if they've been fully pre-qualified, if they've gone through that underwriting process, that always makes us feel a little bit better. And we can see that we can see the pre-qual, we can see what things that the lender's taken a look at, and then how much money they're coming in with a down payment. I think a lot of people have the misconception that, and something that we always worry about is an appraisal. I think some people have the misconception that an appraisal it's just everybody, you're going to send 10 appraisers out and they're all going to come up with the same number. The appraiser works for the bank or the lender. The appraiser doesn't work for not really for the buyer or the seller even. No. The appraiser works for the lender. Yeah. So somebody coming in with a good chunk of cash and in a neighborhood that has quite a few sales, there's a pretty good chance that house is going to appraise no problem. And maybe that's just a really oversimplified. You're on the lending side of it, but it's the buyers that are coming in with a lot less cash that I think maybe the appraiser's does a little bit more scrutinizing. Is that fair to say? I don't know.
So you want a house, but you keep getting beat out by all the cash buyers and institutional investors. So what do? Well, you need to call us at the Cardenas team at Finance of America Mortgage. We can turn you into a cash buyer even if you need a mortgage, so you can beat out the competition and get the home that you want. Visit us at www.thecardenasteam.com or call us at 480-331-4684 to schedule a free consultation. The Cardenas team, we treat you like family.
They can see. So they're not going to be oblivious to see how much they're putting down. It's not supposed to be a consideration when they come up with the value. But I think what I've seen personally is that we're not seeing a lot of low appraisals. No. Like it happens here and there. And it's not really a function of what the list price was and what the sales price was. Like I hear sometimes from people that, oh, well, it was only X over the list price. They should have been able to appraise it. Well, that doesn't matter. Like the list price is irrelevant because that's like a strategy that you use as a listing agent. Like some say, let's, list it really high and, see if we can top out the market. Others will say, well, let's list it a little bit low and then let it get bid up from there. So really what that starting number is makes zero difference at all. It just has to do with what has been selling. And the appraisers are supposed to take into consideration where the market is going. So they analyze like what's the trend, and it helps them bring them in closer to the contract price. And one thing that I think a lot of people, agents and consumers, don't realize sometimes is that offer price or that contract price, that is a factor to the appraisers. Because ultimately, like what you said, if you have 10 appraisers go appraise one property, that you're going to get one value, like never going to happen. You're probably going to get 10 different values because it's an opinion and they're making adjustments according to what their opinion is. They're obviously using hopefully the same data to arrive at that. But one of those pieces of data is what is a totally disinterested third party that's willing to come in and make an offer in the open market, and what are they willing to pay for it? Like that's a pretty good indication of what that home's value is to somebody because they wrote an offer there. And if there's multiple offers, the agent should be communicating that to the appraiser. So they're going to see, okay, the open market drove it to this price. So that's why we don't see a lot of them come in really low, unless somebody just went nuts, and has cash to waste and they just go, blow everybody out of the water by tons of money, then it might come in low. But it doesn't happen all that often. So like waiving that appraisal contingency sounds scary. Like you need to know what the implications are. But one of the other things about that is that if people are waiving all these contingencies, they're putting their earnest money at risk. but that's it. And sometimes, like, if you're putting $5,000 earnest deposit down, like, you don't want to waste $5,000, but sometimes if you consider everything, that might just be the risk that you have to take to get a house. And if you're selling another property, you might be able to make that $5,000 up on the sale. So I think those are the things that are all factors in what people have to consider when they're getting into this market. One thing I want to ask you, you brought up like having a trusted like vendor, whether it's a title company, a lender, or inspector. Like, how important is it for you that your buyers or your sellers like listen to your advice? Like, why should they listen to your advice on who you recommend?
You always want them to listen to everything that you say, but most buyers,
our kids and our spouses don't do that. So why are the buyers going to do that? Our sellers.
Why should they listen to what? No, that is a really good question. We kind of have, through learning and through experience, have kind of figured out, okay, this is what, if you do X, Y, and Z, this will help you to sell your house or to buy a house, or and then having those trusted advisors like you talked about is really important, just to give them, here's a list of lenders, or here's a lender that I've worked with before. A lot of buyers love their banks.
Cringe.
and I've had transactions go just fine with a bank, but it's a different process. It's a little bit slower process, and they have to know that it may take a little bit longer. In general, there's always exceptions to every rule, but and then having a title company. I've had title companies, not ones that I've recommended, make mistakes, and it happens. And so, but there's great title companies out there. I've had great experiences with lots of them out there, but it happens, and sometimes things happen, and you just have to kind of educate buyers and sellers, as like you said, what can happen, what can go wrong in the market. Not that we want to bring up problems or be a pessimist. I try to be as much of an optimist as I can, but stuff happens, and you just want to make them aware of those possible things that can happen, and it helps alleviate that a little bit if I can give them a list of people, and even a list of contractors to, hey, if we're gonna get your house ready to sell, here's some people I would recommend to kind of get it ready, get it show ready. That's one of the biggest things when you're listing a home, is you get one chance to make a first impression, and having those contractors and those trusted advisors in place to kind of help them along the way makes a huge difference.
I think that's the hard thing, for the consumer is, they do this a few times in their life, and, they sometimes will think, well, I'm going to go pick this person, I'm going to go pick that person. Or, I've been with my bank for 20 years, and so I'm going to go there. And the sad reality is, like, they don't actually have a person there. It's a building with a name on it, and that's like what they're thinking of. And what they don't realize with the bank a lot of times is you'll talk to one person, and then you're never going to talk to them again. You're going to go on to the next person, then it's going to go on to the next person. And it's just a totally different process. And that's where I think it's so important to listen. Like, if you're going to pick a real estate agent and you're going to interview them and you're going to find the person that's going to help you, take their advice. Like, they do this for a living. They do this all the time. And the people that they tell you that you should use, it's for a reason. It's not for their own personal benefit. I mean, indirectly, because you're going to have a good transaction and you're going to close and they're going to get paid. But that's at the end of the day, what they're looking for. Like, you want your client to be happy. And if you have them use the people that you have a track record with, and they're going to take care of them and make them happy, you got a much better chance of having a positive outcome at the end than if you just go pick random people, because you found them online or whatever, you heard a rate quote or whatever, or some contractor was going to charge you less money. I mean, that's the sad part for the consumer, is like, you're having to figure out, like, how much can I count on these people versus, what is the price? And somebody can always find somebody cheaper, right? Mm-hmm. But you usually get what you pay for when it comes to that. Yeah. So if you would like give a piece of advice to people in this market, let's say just as a seller in this market, if they're worried about selling their house and not being able to find something, like what's the biggest piece of advice you could tell a seller in this market?
There's options out there. Like you talked about some of the options. I've like I said, I've had contingent offers accepted, even when their house wasn't even on the market yet. People say that's not even a possibility, and it, like I said, you hear people complain. You hear people, agents, we like to complain sometimes.
No, that's impossible.
You complain about that. Oh, there's no inventory. There's no, like we can't find a house for my buyers, all that. And you can't get a contingent offer accepted. It's not even possible. And like, I'm just like, well, why not? Let's try. Like, all they can say is no. I had one client that she called me and she had found her dream house and it was for sale by owner. She hadn't listed her house. She hadn't even got her house ready to sell. There was already an offer on this for sale by owner house. And she called me and she's like, how do I buy this house? And I'm like, let's do it. So we just, called up the owner of the property and just said, this is what we can do. We'll have her house ready by this time. Even though you've got another offer that happened to be cash, like we're going to be the one that you want instead. And
wow.
And just it's just trying to get that communication going, and we kept laughing back and forth because pretty much every one of our conversations was, well, he didn't say no. And so every time we'd start the conversation, well, it wasn't a no. So you just keep going until you get a yes, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
But I don't think I've ever had a client that didn't get a house, an offer accepted, that didn't find one that they liked better in the end. So, and it's hard to tell buyers that when they're really sad that they didn't get the house.
Yeah.
But
it usually does work out though. I mean, I've told that to people too. It's like, there's probably a reason why you didn't get that one. Like, just keep at it. And I think like what you said is super important because there's a lot of no's and can'ts floating around in our industry these days. Like you hear it all the time from people, and it's kind of frustrating, honestly, because like, if you don't try, it's definitely going to be a no.
Yeah.
Like you have to try in order to get a yes. And sometimes you got to get creative. Sometimes you got to be persistent. Sometimes you just have to have patience too, because, things like you said may not work out. And there's probably a good reason for it. And then it'll probably end up working out for the best in the long term.
Yeah.
But on the buyer side of it, then like what's the most important piece of advice you can give buyers in this market?
Just be willing to listen to your agent. Just trust us. It's hard because you got to put a lot of trust into the process, and just do everything that they can to get themselves in a position that they're ready to buy a house. Whether that be like getting fully pre-qualified and underwritten so they're ready to go. Like I've had buyers call me and say, yeah, I think I can afford about this much, and let's go look at houses.
Not a good way to go looking at houses, huh?
No, nobody really likes to go that route. And sometimes, I recommend that they get pre-qualified before we go looking. Sometimes they're pleasantly surprised that they can afford more than they thought they could. Mm-hmm. In fact, I would say more often than not, they can afford more than they thought they could originally. And so that's good. Now, there's always things that shift in the market, and with interest rates and things like that, there's going to be a little bit of changing going on. I don't know. You tell me what your thoughts are on that. Yeah,
certainly, we've seen a lot of change in the last 4 months with interest rates. I think there's definitely an end on the horizon where we're going to expect to see them come back down. So, I think people don't need to lose all hope. I think like one of the biggest things I keep encouraging people about is we hear about, well, is there a housing bubble? Is the housing market going to crash? I'll just wait until home values go down and things like that. And I actually just posted something yesterday on social media, and it was just about facts and numbers. And the simplest explanation is like we look back at 2007 before the housing bubble, which was caused by real estate and mortgage industry. It wasn't an economy that collapsed. Like we collapsed the economy back then. But what it was is that there was an overabundance of homes on the market. Just they were building way too many homes for the amount of demand that there was, even though it was inflated demand because people were getting loans that really should have never gotten loans. Mm-hmm. And where we're at today in comparison is we've got over 3 million less homes for sale than we had in 2007. And we have 14 million more households that are looking to, not all 14 million households are looking for houses, but they estimate about 3.8 million households are looking for houses, and we've got less than 1 million houses in this country for sale right now. So that there's just a huge imbalance, and there's no solution to it coming. So, if you're thinking about like, should I wait? I mean, the answer is no. Like the houses are still going to keep going up. They're not going to go as crazy as they have the last couple of years, but they're going to keep going up at a pretty good pace over the next several years because of this problem that we have. And, if your rate's higher today than it was 6 months ago, oh, well, like nothing you can do about it. But there's a pretty good chance the next year you're going to be able to bring that rate back down through a refinance. So you might as well take advantage of how much the house will go up in value while you're waiting for rates to come back down, because there's a real good chance that they'll come back down. So.
Well, that's good to hear.
Got to bring the positivity, right?
No, it's all about the positivity. And I have clients that 5-6 years ago told me they were going to wait for the market to crash.
Kicking themselves a little bit, huh?
Before they bought a house. I don't know what to say. And they're still not in a house. So when it comes down, and maybe there'll be buyers again. I don't know. So, yeah. Yeah,
it's going to be a while then. I think they should probably think about getting back into the thought process of buying a house now before they lose out anymore.
Yeah. Well, it's just the people that aren't in the game, the people that don't own a house right now, that are really struggling to get into it.
Yeah. That's a whole other topic of conversation, because there's a big challenge for people who don't own a house. And I always tell people, like, you never know what somebody's abilities are, or if they've got family that can help, but it really is in people's best interest to try to get into something any which way that they can, because things are just going to be more expensive as we go down the road with the how the housing market's going to be, how we have so many big corporate investors in single family homes nowadays that if you wait too long, you could get left out altogether. And that's sad, because I mean, real estate is how most people end up building wealth for themselves and their families, is be able to buy real estate. And if you can't do it, it's pretty tough.
Yeah.
So can you solve that issue for me right now?
Well, it was funny. I was talking to a friend last night, just randomly. They were walking down the street, and he said, my kids are 12 and I think like 12 and 16. And he's like, I said a couple years ago, we need to buy him a house. Like if they're going to be able to get into the game, they need a house now. And he's like, I should have done it a couple years ago, but I might still do it now. Just buy them each a house, so that when it comes time for them to need a house, when they get married and need a house, that they'll be able to have a house. Yeah. So
that's a good idea.
It's not a bad idea.
It really is a good idea, because you're going to have somebody else paying the rent for it until they need it. And that value will continue to go up for many years. And then the teenagers, sometimes they're terrible and you want them out of your house anyway. So you can just go tell them to go live in that house for a little while.
Go live in your house. You have one, go live in your house.
You got one early, just like, get out. I can't take it anymore.
That's an option. So.
Maybe not recommended, but I just, a friend of mine on Facebook was struggling with a teenage daughter. And it's like, you just want to put them in another place for a little while and get them out of your hair.
That's funny. Yeah. So I don't know. And so I hadn't heard that thought process before, but it makes sense. I wish I would have bought my kids houses a few years back, but
yeah, I never thought about it in that way, but it definitely makes a lot of sense. Because I mean, we're trying to tell everybody, hey, take advantage of all the equity that you've gained if you own a house over the last few years. Mm-hmm. Take some of that and go use it to buy another investment property. And when we go through and show people what the numbers are, same thing with people like to put really large down payments down. And it's like, well, you can do that, but here's another way to think about it. Like if you split up where you put your money, you might be able to buy one or maybe even two other properties, let those build equity, put renters in there, let them pay for it. Now you've got another one or two assets that are growing and helping you, create some wealth down the road for you. Mm-hmm. And if you have young kids, you might be able to stick them in there down the road and pass it on.
It's not a bad idea.
And I think what you said earlier is like super important right now. There's a lot of people saying what you can't do, but you can do stuff. Like the number of transactions that are actually taking place is still very good. Mm-hmm. Like there's a solid number of transactions happening. There's just not a lot of stuff sitting very long. Mm-hmm. So our inventory is low. It's not super easy to find something, but if you're committed to it and you've got the right attitude about it, like you can still find a house, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I still have buyers finding houses and it's possible. It's not a no.
Yeah. Don't say no.
Yeah. It wasn't a no. So as long as there's a chance, there's still stuff out there.
Yeah.
And it's just trying to find the right solution. But not listening to all the negative, because like you said, there's still transactions happening. Mm-hmm. It's not like houses are not being bought and sold.
Yep.
It is happening. It's just being persistent and trying to make those transactions work.
Well, and I think that's where, you have to find the right people to work with you, like yourself, who's not going to take no and not going to say no and tell you what you can't do. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, because I know what your attitude is like and what your perspective is. And I think that's something that people need, is to have somebody that can help them and be real positive about stuff. So if somebody listening or watching wants to get in touch with you and have you help them with that house hunt or the sale of a house, how can they get in touch with you?
Okay. So they can get on my website. It's Find Home Sweet AZ Home, or my cell phone is 480-688-7033.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for not saying no to me when I invited you to come on.
I know. I can't say no. That's probably my biggest weakness, but it was a lot of fun. So, and I appreciate everything that you do for my clients, and you've helped me out. And yeah, it's good to have those relationships.
Our pleasure. We try not to say no too much too.
Yeah, it's good.
Thanks again, Rachele, for coming on. And thank you guys for joining us. Appreciate you watching and listening, and look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode.
Thanks for joining us, and please remember to go and subscribe, like, share, all that cool stuff to help us grow, and come back tomorrow to listen to our next episode. Until then, go out and live life uncensored.
Thanks for listening to the Uncensored Real Estate Podcast. Don't forget to help us out and subscribe. Follow and give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform. And check us out on YouTube for the full video podcast. If you want more information on any of the topics discussed on today's episode, email us at uncensoredrealestatepodcast@gmail.com or give the Cardenas Mortgage Team a call at 480-331-4684.